It's a big day for Africa. For the first time ever, the G20 meeting is being held on African soil. Johannesburg, South Africa, is playing host to the world's most powerful leaders. This is a historic moment. It's a chance for Africa to have its voice heard on the global stage. The G20 is a big deal. It represents the 20 largest economies in the world. They come together to talk about the biggest challenges facing the planet. Think climate change, poverty, and global security. This year, those conversations are happening in Africa. This is a sign of Africa's growing importance in the world. African countries are becoming major players in the global economy. They are also on the front lines of the fight against climate change. The world needs to listen to what Africa has to say. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa welcomed the world leaders to Johannesburg. He didn't waste any time. Ramaphosa got straight to the point. The world is facing some serious problems. He called for global cooperation to tackle these challenges head-on. Ramaphosa spoke about the need for peace and security. He highlighted the ongoing war in Ukraine. He called for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. He also addressed the issue of climate change. Ramaphosa urged countries to work together to reduce emissions and protect the planet. Food and energy insecurity were also high on the agenda. Ramaphosa stressed the need for sustainable development. He emphasized the importance of ensuring everyone has access to food and energy. His message was clear: we're all in this together. While Ramaphosa called for unity, it wasn't all smiles and handshakes at the G20. Deep divisions remain between member countries. The war in Ukraine cast a long shadow over the summit. Many countries condemned Russia's invasion. They called for an end to the violence. However, Russia defended its actions. They blamed the West for the conflict. This disagreement highlighted the challenges of finding common ground on critical issues. Climate change was another source of tension. Some countries are pushing for more ambitious targets to reduce emissions. Others are hesitant to commit to major changes. The G20 is supposed to be a forum for cooperation, but the reality is much more complicated. There are deep disagreements on some of the most pressing issues of our time. One notable absence from the G20 was US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio skipped the meeting due to policy disagreements with South Africa. This sparked controversy and raised questions about the US's commitment to Africa. The US and South Africa have clashed over several issues. This includes South Africa's stance on the war in Ukraine and its relationship with China. Rubio's absence was seen by some as a snub to South Africa and the African continent. The US downplayed the significance of Rubio's absence. They insisted that the US remains committed to engaging with Africa. But the optics of the situation were hard to ignore. The US absence cast a shadow over the summit. It highlighted the challenges of maintaining strong relationships in a divided world. Section 5, A Fractured World, Geopolitical Tensions take center stage. The G20 meeting took place against a backdrop of rising geopolitical tensions. The war in Ukraine has exacerbated existing divisions between world powers. It has also created new challenges for global cooperation. The conflict has strained relations between Russia and the West. It has also led to increased military spending and a renewed focus on security alliances. The war in Ukraine is not the only source of tension. China's growing influence is also reshaping the geopolitical landscape. The rivalry between the United States and China is playing out on multiple fronts. This includes trade, technology, and military power. These tensions are creating uncertainty and instability in the international system. The G20 was an opportunity to address these challenges. Section 6. The climate crisis, a looming threat to humanity. Climate change was high on the agenda at the G20 summit, and for good reason. Climate change is one of the most pressing challenges facing humanity. It is already having a devastating impact on countries around the world. Africa is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The continent is facing more frequent and severe droughts, floods, and heat waves. These extreme weather events are displacing communities, destroying crops, and exacerbating food insecurity. The G20 countries are responsible for the vast majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. They have a moral obligation to take action to address this crisis. Developed countries also have a responsibility to support developing countries. They need help to adapt to the impacts of climate change and transition to cleaner energy sources. Section 7. Food and energy. Insecurity, a recipe for disaster. The G20 meeting also addressed the interconnected challenges of food and energy insecurity. The war in Ukraine has disrupted global supply chains, driving up food and energy prices. This has had a devastating impact on developing countries. Millions of people are facing hunger and malnutrition. Rising energy prices are also making it more difficult for businesses to operate and for people to heat their homes. The G20 countries recognized the need for urgent action. They discussed ways to stabilize markets, increase humanitarian assistance, and support countries in need. They also emphasized the importance of investing in sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. These are critical steps to building more resilient food and energy systems. Section 8. The road ahead. Can the G20 deliver? The G20 summit in Johannesburg highlighted the major challenges facing the world today. From geopolitical tensions to the climate crisis to food and energy insecurity, the stakes have never been higher. The question is, can the G20 deliver? The G20 has the potential to make a real difference. It brings together the world's most powerful countries. It gives them a platform to address shared challenges. But the G20 has often been criticized for its lack of concrete action. The summit in Johannesburg produced some positive outcomes, but it remains to be seen whether these commitments will translate into meaningful change. The road ahead will be difficult, but the G20 has a responsibility to step up and address these urgent challenges. Section 9. Africa's moment, a new era of global leadership. Africa's first ever G20 summit was a historic moment. It was an opportunity for the continent to showcase its potential and to advocate for its interests on the global stage. The summit also highlighted Africa's growing role as a leader in international affairs. African countries are playing an increasingly important role in addressing global challenges. This includes climate change, peacekeeping, and economic development. The world is taking notice. Africa is no longer content to be a bystander in global affairs. The continent is demanding a seat at the table. It is ready to help shape the future of our planet. The G20 summit in Johannesburg was a sign of things to come. It marked the beginning of a new era of African leadership on the global stage.